Welcome back to Kivumbi 2017. We are less than 24 hours before Kenyans go to the polls. But will the elections take place? Well, your guess is as good as mine. This is the question that Kenyans have been asking. But the fate of tomorrow's election is now in the hands of the Supreme Court of Kenya, which is set to rule on whether the election should go on or be postponed altogether. The case may go either way. We can't predict. Still, IEBC Chair Wafula Chebukati has now appointed Vice Chair Consolata Nkatha as the Deputy National Returning Officer. The appointment has sparked mixed reactions, with outright dismissal from the opposition coalition NASA. And the Raila declaration. What exactly is the opposition leader up to? Kenyans can only wait as the clock ticks. And here on Kivumbi 2017, we are set to bring you everything that matters. But how has the media covered the elections? Let us delve into our chat. And to drive this discussion, I have veteran journalist Julie Masiga, Patrick Gadaro, who is a communications expert, and Victor Bwire, who is a programs manager for Media Council of Kenya. Welcome, lady and gentlemen. Very, very uncharted waters that we are in right now as a country, and I think the world over is literally having their focus on us. I was listening to BBC this morning, and they had a major segment on their show basically focusing on Kenyan elections. So it is a big thing. But let's start with ourselves and local media. And I'll start with you, Victor, on where we are today. Since the 8th of August, we've known that the election is going to be, well, initially it was the 17th, then moved to the 26th. So one would assume we've had ample time to learn from our mistakes on the 8th. Do you think we're in a better position as media to give our best shot now if the elections do take place tomorrow?
Thank you, Mike. One, the preparation for coverage of tomorrow's event are problematic to many media houses. At least I've talked to a few of colleagues in most of the media houses, and even the physical logistical arrangements around how they will cover this election might not be a big departure from what happened before. Largely because, given the strength of most of our media houses, we got stuck in chasing the confusion and the politics around the election to a level where...
Say between the time the nullification on the 1st of September and now, there's also been a lot that's
too
been
much happening.
Yeah.
And given the strength of most of our newsrooms, we got stuck into that to a level where we also we were playing like there will be an election or no election. So up to yesterday, I was talking to even Katie and myself. You just sent your reporters last night to the various deployment. I think the nation is still also just deploying. I mean, a few hours to election in terms of strengthening. So that already tells you something. Look at just before 8th, while media houses talked about heavy investment for election, and they talked about it, heavy investment was largely on technology and related, because you find that most of the media houses retained the same number, of reporters they had, other than the people they had put on board for 4 days, who would never help them because of other issues. So looking at it, it's a big challenge, I can tell you. And then we also got, again, we are missing media house or journalist interpretation of most of the things. We largely depending on the experts bring. And if you mention BBC and other international press, you'd see there's media house positions on issues. Until 2 days ago, when most of our media houses had the page 1 commentaries on what they think should happen, it has taken us too long to make a position on what the agenda we want. And 3, we have again gotten stuck with the personality politics.
Okay.
And just finishing, we got stuck in a way, and we have not been focusing on IBC, who are supposed to manage the election. If you talk to IBC staff themselves, officially, you find there's too many stories we gloss over, and we got stuck in the Jubilee.
But Victor, haven't we broken that down in terms of what the different political sides are saying? We also have looked at the IEBC in terms of their preparedness. We've managed to arrange a few interviews even with the likes of Chiloba, with Wafula Chebukati. I've seen a number of newspaper details of what else is it that you'd have expected us to do.
What they tell you on these shows are purely managed communication. But what is happening on the ground is very different. To the extent that, are we ready? Are we not ready? Those are issues that need to be looked at. Because outside even the education of minimums and the rest, have the 11,000 whatever forms that we are saying were never seen, has anybody followed up what happened on those things? Because those are part of the preparedness we are talking about, not just the individuals we are saying, but there are things, specific things that were raised. When we are talking about the safety concerns of IBC staff, for example, in those areas, have we seen any article where, where somebody has followed and ensured who is the returning officer? Have they gazetted already the officials that will be managing those elections? Because up to and until yesterday, they were still gazetting Jirongo or somebody as a candidate. What did the law say? So those are...
All right. Julie, Victor doesn't seem very confident that we're going to have any difference from the media. What's your take on that?
Interestingly enough, I agree with Victor today. No, I think, what have we done different since the 8th? I think since the 8th, we've been doing what we did even before then, in terms of reporting verbatim what candidates are saying and bringing analysts such as us to talk on shows. I don't think we've actually unpacked what happened, what went wrong. The Supreme Court said 1, 2, 3, 4. NASA made these allegations. Jubilee had these defenses. But what actually happened on that day in terms of what went wrong with this election, many people are still wondering, what are these illegalities and what are these irregularities? I know they're there in the judgment, but have we unpacked them for people? Going forward, how are we going to do things differently? As he says, if people are being deployed yesterday for an election, perhaps we're saying that we've done this before, we've got this. But I think now is our time to tell the story. On August 8th, we missed the biggest opportunity to tell the story of the elections and give people another narrative of what's actually happening based on the facts.
What, in your opinion, is the story that we should be telling now?
I think last time, the story was covering the elections and providing people with an independent tally. We failed. I think we failed completely. I think everybody can agree to that, even within the media fraternity. This time, are we going to deploy to every constituency, and are we going to give people an independent result, apart from what is being given by IBC and what the politicians are saying? Last time, we were kind of embedded in the machinery of IBC and the government, and yes, and the government, or the Jubilee Party, and we didn't give a third perspective based on facts that we actually saw, things we saw actually happening on the ground. So I think that needs to happen tomorrow, if possible, where if perhaps by now media houses could have come together and formed some kind of partnership in terms of tallying and announcing and even maybe calling the election, so that we are ahead of the game, not trying to catch up and reporting what basically promoting a narrative that has already been prepared beforehand.
All right, and now Gadara, of course, if you two agree that we are not prepared, I don't have to say, he'll probably just weigh in on that. But Gadara, your thoughts on where we are and whether we are prepared to do this differently?
I think the question should be framed a bit differently. It's whether the media has actually learned the lessons from its previous coverage, both on August 8th and in previous elections. And in a sense, I don't think it has. I don't think it has actually taken the time to go through and understand what went wrong and even explain, that these are the measures it is taking to ameliorate that. Good examples are, for example, we've had, even on this very show, that media personnel, for example, were barred or prevented from accessing polling stations and constituency centers on August 8th and in the aftermath of that. The question then stands, what have they done now to ensure that that doesn't happen? You have people like Nation who said they sent out 270 people to the various constituency tallying centers and only got back 90 results. Understand from the other stations it's actually much less. Question is, again, what have they done to fix that? We're not hearing any discussions, any conversations around this. In fact, the only person I've heard, which is funnily enough, is from Dennis Itumbio in State House, who on press pass was saying that there is an arrangement between government and media houses to ensure that media can cover announcement at tallying centers. You don't hear media houses telling you this, which leads me to my question: what is the plan? And if you're not learning from your past mistakes, how can you make sure that you don't repeat them. And I think the media also has to acknowledge that it's got a credibility deficit, at least as far as it comes to reporting elections. You're going to be judged basically on the basis of what you did on August 8th and how better you can do that. And I think there's many things that media should be doing now to sort of shore up its own credibility. One of the big ones is you had a judgment, I think it was just last week, or this past week, that said the ads you are running from PDU were illegal. We haven't had any media house come and discuss that. Why did we run it? Are we going to give back that public money that we took?
Have they been paid?
And stuff. So this, I think, are fundamental questions that go to the credibility of how you cover the elections and not just the mechanics of how you do it. When it comes to, again, deploying, are you going to have joint centers? Who is planning, for example, a tallying center, an independent tallying center?
They won't.
We don't hear anything about that. Yet IBC has said that they're going to be facilitated to report from constituency centers. We question why they want on August 8th, it seems to imply that. It doesn't. And finally, I totally agree with what Victor and Julia have said, which is, in essence, the reporting is still very much predicated on what the politicians are saying. And it is really a regurgitation of what the various positions by the two groups are, but not really trying to get people to understand what the truth is. We've I think, confused, quote-unquote, objectivity simply being this, where you report what one side said and then report what the other said. But what is the actual truth on the ground? And helping people to understand what they face, what the challenges for the country are, and even going into the court cases we have today, to see what are our options as a country. What if this is postponed? What would be a possible date that we're looking at? What does the law say? What does the law require? And going through all the intricacies of this, I think we've been much more a means to confuse rather than to explain, and let people come out saying, we know this is the positions as they are.
All right, Victor, in all fairness, it's been a very challenging time for everybody, especially given the number of changes and how things have metamorphosed. As we speak right now, we're waiting to hear what the Supreme Court is going to, what judgment they'll give as to whether they will allow for the elections to go on or not. So we are still there in limbo. And this is literally, what, 23, 24 hours before? So 23 hours, actually. So there are challenges that we certainly have not foreseen and may not have prepared for. But looking at it from that perspective, I think, in all fairness, the media has tried to unpack the intrigues as they go on. Again, let's look at capacity, because we also have an issue of capacity. Sure. When we talk about having people in the 290 constituencies, it requires a good planning, which maybe we didn't do on the 8th. But now, with the intrigues that have been happening, did we really have time to do that?
Mike, in one of the things that I've learned, many times I've attended meetings with IBC up to including, and yesterday I was in a meeting with IBC somewhere. We have continued to treat elections as an event, not a process. And that's why we find ourselves many times in this problem. I was looking at a document that was prepared by IBC some times back when we were doing these trainings for journalists, and some of the things they were uncomfortable with within the electoral laws that were made just before August and if people picked and followed some of those things, we could have sorted out some of the issues that are coming. The issues of technology and law. I mean, we have prescribed in law even which technology and which IBC itself has admitted is difficult to implement. So those are challenges that we would have picked and followed up. Again, you listen to IBC itself. For example, what Chebukati was saying the other day, his chairman's statement, was known by people and the media before. I mean, to some people it was news. So two, looking at even the preparation, remember, most of our media house owners are also politicians. And they engage in some of these processes. And many of them are business people, again, who engage with these processes. Are they deliberately not investing in this process? as a statement. I mean, we must also explore those things. Because, like you mentioned, up to and by Thursday last week, media owners were going to do independent tallying. I mean, and then all of a sudden, they're not doing it. So, I mean, we must also look at this statement. Is it lack of purely failure to plan, or is it a statement that maybe do we need to invest in this process? And
that brings in the other question now of whether we should, like in the States, you have media houses that openly declare their position and who they're supporting. Do we need to get to that point? Because it looks like secretly we actually do that. Yes. And I know KTN News has come under a lot of fire for being called partisan, although I don't believe we are. But should we get to a point where media houses maybe can openly declare and say that this is who we are supporting, and that way then we would not expect, I don't know whether they would still be objective, because objectivity, like Adara says, does not necessarily mean saying Raila said and Uhuru said. There needs to be a bit more context put into what they said.
There's a time we had worked on media, because media, like you were mentioning, international media, supports parties on individual based on ideology or something they promise to do, not because so-and-so is from my tribe or so-and-so owns me. So do our political parties, for example, stand for anything that then media would, those are also still challenges. That some of our politicians, we have cut and paste ideologies where nobody stands for anything. So sometimes it becomes also provides challenges. But I can tell you, because even the independent tallying you mentioned was not going to be funded by government or media houses. It was going to be funded by donors who are willing to give media owners money to do.
Yeah, and I know there's been training going on that sense, yes, and funding coming, like, for example, for the Germans.
Yes, but all of a sudden. So that's why I'm saying, again, our media owners, even as we talk about journalists, the same outfit. Are there any politics within the Media Owners Association? We have now the Digital Media Owners Association. We have the Media Owners so these contexts must also be, so that sometimes it's not lack of failure. I mean, failure to plan, but sometimes it's deliberate. And do we need to invest?
It's collusion.
And sometimes you look at it like the investments we are giving, largely the framing. Most of our news houses, media houses, have deployed people largely to Nyanza, those regions.
Where it's expected.
And the framing is, you are looking for violence and where people will be fighting. You already see such kind of, that's why I'm talking about the plan. Two, again, are we as media looking at scenarios, for example, in some of these, or are we just, I've listened to, many analyses, even just the previous colleagues who are here. And those of you who don't interact with the politicians would say, we don't know what will happen, we don't know. Are we looking at what possibly, how much do our political reporters, for example, interact with the politicians and this group? Because once you interact, you get more insight.
You get the third angle that not everybody else is
because I've listened and sometimes you say it's just lack of. So again, that's something we need to invest in the media going forward. That's why I was saying we must start treating elections as a process, not just an event for 26 tomorrow.
Okay. Julie, is it possible that the reason why media in this country, possibly like I think it's Victor that mentioned, we are more personality driven because our political parties in terms of ideology are not that strong? And if you even ask most Kenyans, what does your party, the party that you support, really, what does it do for you over the long time with longevity? Not many people would be able to tell you. What they'll tell you is that either Uhuru has said or Baba said.
Yeah, I think Victor is right about the copy-paste ideology. It's hard to actually zero in on an actual ideology on either side. So it's very personality-based, and then that leads to identity politics, which is, again, mired in tribe and ethnicity. So even coming back right down to the media, let's just admit it, even in media houses and newsrooms, people are split. You're supporting one side or the other side. Up to the ownership, they're also split, supporting one side or the other side. So the whole thing has become a partisan, tribalistic kind of creature that is dictating how things get reported, whether we have things like independent tallying. You had a guest on before, just before we came on, was talking about the heart of Kenyans. This is actually the problem. Our our driving force is my person is in power, or my tribe this, my tribe that. We're very ethnic-minded, and that is clouding everything that we do, right down even to the police forces, I bet, and the security forces. I bet everybody has a stand that they are taking based on their ethnicity, and this is the problem even when it comes to reporting. So where does that leave us? It leaves individual journalists who must decide to do the right thing. And I don't think the right thing is either neutrality or objectivity. The right thing is, what is the truth? And how can you convey that truth to the masses? Because clearly, many journalists don't have the support of the owners of the associations because, again, of the partisanship and the ethnicity. So it's up to the fourth estate, which was envisioned as a voice for the people, as a source of credible information, the individual journalists in the machine across the country. And social media now has become the fifth estate. Yeah, it's become the other arm of investigative journalism to tell this story, because we're seeing we have very many challenges, and we're not going to solve the problems of the heart of Kenyans tomorrow. And I don't think actually we dealt with this election as an event, Bire. I think we have been in election mode for at least a year, like I've said before, and we've been building up every other month, you'd say, with 10 months to the next general election, with 9 months, and talking about ideas and processes as we lead up to the event. The people who've made, to the election, the people who've made the election an event are the politicians. And maybe now what we're doing is now maybe we're dancing to their tune as we get closer and closer to the event. But I think we should be given credit for trying to, as Gadara always says, to look at things before, on the day, and after. Because even after 26th, we're still going to have a nation. And as Obama, I think, was saying in a clip that was going around on social media, you can't divide a country before an election and imagine that you will lead them after that as a united people. And this, unfortunately, is the place that we find ourselves.
All right, Gadara, let me come to you. And one of the values that should guide us as media is truth, just like you've mentioned. One of the core values that we should have at the end of the day. And I think it would also help in spicing or putting the objectivity into perspective is truth. Now, one truth that maybe we seem to have forgotten, and maybe this is because we are following the tune of the politicians, is the fact that the truth is on the 27th, the sun will rise and life goes on. Another truth that we may have forgotten is the fact that this whole scenario of waiting for the 26th with bated breath is more for the political class than the Kenyans, in terms of it is them that either have a job or out of a job. For us Kenyans, our life probably goes on as it should. Is that something that maybe we should have highlighted more, so that Kenya is not so tense, waiting for a date, which is evidently not going to solve our problem? Because our problem is not whether Uhuru is going to be president or Raila. That's not going to solve our problem.
Well, I think this kind of links to what you had asked before about media houses taking positions. And the fact is, I think that is sort of the wrong prescription and the wrong problem. The problem isn't that the media houses don't openly take positions. I don't think that that in itself, whether they did or they didn't, should influence how they cover the elections. If you look at the US, a good example, as you mentioned, media houses such as Fox are completely aligned with one party, MSNBC with somebody else. But when it comes to reporting the elections and what the outcome of the elections is, there's very little difference between the two. They actually report the numbers, and they actually do their own tallying, which pretty much tallies, across the board when they call the elections. So having a media house saying we support Kenyatta, another one saying we support Uhuru, should not really in itself impact what they report as the truth on the ground. And I totally agree. I think that there's a sense in which we don't espouse to people what the place of elections is in the overall scheme of democracy. We have, as a media, sort of privileged elections. There's always this talk about it being your one time to, your vote being your voice. This is the one chance you get to participate. Yet, in a democracy, it should be your participation is constant. It's throughout. Elections is just one way. Whether you vote or not, it doesn't matter. You have other ways and many other ways of participating. And because we have denigrated those, when it comes to how people participate when laws are being made, they're all told, gather somewhere at a county hall, which majority of Kenyans cannot do. We should be asking, what is the scope for them to participate in between? so that the elections stop becoming this big
huge thing that determines whether we live or we die.
Exactly, and the other thing that you've said that I totally agree with is that elections are about politicians. They're about politicians getting jobs, to be specific, you know. In our scenario, they are really rarely about competing visions.
Right.
You know, if you compare the manifestos, well, there might be certain differences within the language of it. In general, what NASA was saying and what CORD was saying before them throughout the 5 years was essentially, you know, if it comes to SGR, there's no big dispute whether or not we should have an SGR between the politicians. You know, they are all jumping. When they say we are going to have free secondary education, all of them jump onto this train. There's no big difference there. So it's really about who gets to power. And that is something that the politicians have interest in. But not necessarily that the populace has. The populace is more engaged with what happens, what policies are put in place, etc. And those are the things that we should be discussing. You remember in the advance, when we got into the campaign season, the Nation published a list that they say this is the agenda for the country, the agenda for the nation.
Yeah, 12 points.
You know. Yet, in the entire coverage following that, there was no comparison. This is the agenda for the nation. This is what the politicians are saying. How does it match? We don't hear that. We are more into the drama of the election and reporting this fight between these two bulls, but not what the interest of the people within this scenario is.
Okay.
And I think till we switch that, till we actually become more serious about telling guys, this is about you, not about them.
Not about them.
Yeah.
All right, it might be too late in the day, given that we're counting down the hours to do the manifestos and compare those 12 points and even the irreducible minimum. Somebody mentioned here that they've not been there, although I think we've mentioned them time and again. But let's forwardcast to, well, the next few 23 hours. If the elections do take place, based on what ruling is going to be given by the Supreme Court, Victor, what is it that you'd expect as, let me not call them irreducible minimums, but minimum expectation of what media should at least deliver to the people for us to feel like we have done our job as the members of the fourth estate?
Thank you. One, I know the issue of tallying will still be a problem, because looking at the logistics that have been put in place even by IBC themselves, it won't be easy. In the 290 or the 40,000 and so polling centers, to get those results posted and whatever. That is going to be a challenge. And whoever is expecting that media will give that independent tallying might be disappointed again. Because it's not that media doesn't want to do it, but the infrastructure is already there.
Capacity.
And the capacity and the issue of safety concerns for journalists and even for electoral officials, there are some areas that might be impossible to reach. That's one thing. I've just come from the field. I can tell you, I was in Kwale, Kilifi, I've gone to Western, I came back on Monday. And you don't see a sense where some of those areas will be accessed. So that already is a challenge. Two, like you said, there were arrangements around of issues of releasing results. But when, again, the independent tallying thing flopped, we go back to IBC. Now, given that, again, most of the IBC officers, remember some of the IBC officers have resigned. It's a fact. Now, the new ones who have been appointed, have they been trained like before on access to information, on allowing journalists some of these things? They don't know. So we have a very militarized electoral process where there will be a lot of hostility because people are thinking somebody either is coming to disrupt the peace in the polling center. So there will be, and obviously you have seen the deployment of security agencies who will be manning most of those centers. So already there will be a lot of hostility against journalists. I mean, Media Council has deployed monitors from yesterday to some of the areas just to pick how journalists should be.
To all 290 police.
No. Just a few to get a sense of how journalists should be. Because we already see a problem of lack of information. Yeah. There will be a lot of tension between journalists, security agents, and electoral officials. Yeah. So it might impact on the issue. More importantly to us, and we have talked to colleagues, is the safety concerns for journalists. We want the stories, yes, but they must sense and do a self-awareness and risk analysis of the areas in which they operate. Because we already have a number of journalists who have already received the threats, who have already been threatened. Obviously, in some of those areas, the people don't want to be shown to have voted. Right. So again, there will be that. So again, but we hope whether elections will be there or not, I mean, depending on Maraga or whatever we have, let's just ensure that we don't over-emphasize, over-focus on those issues and events that are likely to break the country again.
All right. Julie, your expectations of what maybe the media should do?
I think it's going to be a logistical hurdle to climb over in terms of capacity, the numbers we have in newsrooms.
But could that have been avoided? Because, I mean, the 26th is a date that we knew was coming.
Yes, but still it's a matter of resources and a matter of how many people actually work for the media in terms of can you afford to hire extra people to make sure that there's one person or two people at every single tallying constituency tallying center across the country to give you real-time updates in terms of cameras going around. Just in terms of capacity and equipment, I don't think it's possible to cover the whole sphere comprehensively. Given the fact that we've done this before, there's also a lot of fatigue. There's a lot of things that are working against the media generally in this kind of scenario we find ourselves in where we're doing an election again. What I think we're going to have to do is rely, normally it's the media giving people information. Right now I think they're going to have to rely on sources, ordinary people on the ground to actually relay information back this way. I think this is the only way this is going to work. If we work in collaboration with people on social media, people on the ground, citizen journalists, so to speak, in terms of gathering the information and making sure that that information is accurate. Because logistically, in terms of capacity, I think it's impossible at this point, point in time, this late in the day, to say that we're going to be able to cover these elections comprehensively, given what happened on August 8th. So I think that is the way to go. Basically, first of all, to make it, okay, we've talked about all these challenges we have from the top to the bottom in terms of partisanship, in terms of the directives being given not to have independent tallying centers. That is why I was saying that it's down to the individual journalists who
take up the
enter this profession, yes, as a calling, to now decide to do the right, authentic, and truthful thing.
All right. Gadara?
Fake news. Sorry, please. Let's our colleagues in the field be cautious about news. A lot of things will be circulating.
Yes.
Let's
and
verify,
verify
verify information so that we are not used as a conduit to spread
yes,
things that we have.
Of course, in terms of things. I'm not just saying just run with anything that you get, but rely a lot more on people on the ground, given that you cannot be everywhere.
All right, and I guess that's a challenge that we're also going through. Gadara, as you come in with this, let's also think about, because we tend to think of journalists as those operating within the mainstream media houses. We also have journalists who are freelance, who basically have done very good jobs on breaking down and repackaging it, and what maybe we should expect from both the mainstream media and possibly journalists who are on freelance.
Well, I think the expectation should pretty much be the same, that you're actually explaining what's going on, giving people a better understanding of what's happening. I think that when it comes to, especially, I mean, I know lots of the stick is directed towards the mainstream press, but it's because the mainstream press are the people who largely benefit from the space that we have created. And we as Kenyans have invested in to allow them to report. And to a large extent, they seem not to take that duty very seriously. I think that the mainstream press really needs to look back and ask, what did we get wrong? And to be honest with itself. There's going to be at least two narratives running on the 26th. There's going to be a narrative of the election. There's going to be a narrative of whether it's a protest or people stay home, etc. You can't afford to ignore one and say and give the other. You know, you've got to be able to explain what is happening, across. And I think that when it comes, if, for example, we have protests on the 26th, it's unclear, given that Raila at one time has said
no, he has said no protest, stay at home.
And he said that he told BBC that
stay at home.
They said it's going to be the mother of all protests.
Yeah,
but now
and then he told the BBC that something different.
The mother of all sittings.
So it's about, we're not too sure. We're hoping there'll be some clarity today.
The announcement will be different.
But the point,
and I want us to wind up.
But the point is this: if indeed there are protests, one of the things that the media was accused of doing, which I think was legitimate, legitimate that he didn't do, or not legitimate as in the accusation was truthful, was that it did not cover the protests that were happening, especially in the in advance of the announcement of Kenyatta as winner. Will we have that mainstream press? Will we have that again, where if there are protests breaking out across the country against this, that media will give them a blackout under the talk of let us preserve the peace? So I think media has to question itself that way, and how will it then cover those protests, which is also a good question. And much more importantly, when it comes to reporting not just the election results, also how many people participated, etc., that it should not be sort of tied down by what the IEBC says in Nairobi. That the media should be creating the capacities to tell the stories down there, and not just wait for the official truth to be handed down and then regurgitated.
I want us to wind up, but before we wind up, as media, I think you've mentioned that rather than just report what people say, we should look at context and all that. And Raila is on record of saying that he's going to make a big announcement today. Julie, your predictions of what the announcement might be. We've had Nasa and Raila give us big announcement many times, but what's your thoughts on the announcement? Very briefly.
I can tell you what I've heard. I really can't make a prediction either way, because this is just unprecedented, all of it. Some people are saying...
But isn't journalism, part of journalism, having that context and, getting the information and saying, look, he has already announced that he's not going to be in the election. He's boycotting. Yeah. He's already announced that, well, now there's going to be no protests. What else can he say? He
could possibly say that I'm still part of this race because I don't think he's formally withdrawn, and say go ahead and vote. His name is on the ballot. He could say that. He could say there's a protest again. I think the thing that would cause an absolute huge ripple is if he instructs his people who ascribe to his ideology in the NASA fraternity to go and vote, because I think many of them will see that as a betrayal, given the whole time the narrative has been there will be no election on 26. But that's the one thing that would actually change the way, shake things up, perhaps that even more, yes, than anything that might happen in the Supreme Court. But I think I'll say this: politics is politics, and politicians know how to play that game. The rest of us often are innocent bystanders and observers. Yes, so anything could happen. But by far, the thing that would shake up the game, if we can call it that, is if he now said that he's actually going to participate.
Victor, as we wind up, your thoughts on Raila's big announcement today?
No, stay at home. No demonstrations. Elections, whether they go on or not go on. And then NASA MPs likely to resign en masse, so that we have more than 100 by-elections. We go to another general election.
Okay, Dadara?
I think that what matters more is what the Supreme Court will say, and I think what in the various petitions, both at the Supreme Court and I think at the High Court, and what they will come up with. I think there is a high possibility that the courts might decide that this needs to be postponed. I think that depending on what the courts say, you might actually have, I think the Supreme Court had said it would sit at 10 today. I think NASA might wait for what comes out of there. And
before making their announcement.
Before actually making a statement.
They're meeting at 2.
Yeah, and I think their statements will be very predicated on what they say. Regardless, I think the media has to prepare for the scenarios. So you have to do your scenario mapping. You have to say what happens if he says this, how do we cover it? And more importantly, as you said, it's all about context, and it's about going back and understanding, that this is not, everybody says it's unprecedented. Our politicians have shifted goalposts at the last minute before. We've had changes, I think, in pretty much every election to election rules, and stuff like that. And we need to learn to adapt, to that. And if we actually invested in understanding what went before, then it puts us in a much better position to explain. One final thing.
We need to finish.
Yeah, one final thing is when it comes to the government's response, especially to protesters, I think there has to be a much bigger spotlight put on that. If we have a scenario where police are being accused of having killed 70 guys in the last 3 months. That is a huge, huge problem.
Especially election-based gender.
Yeah,
we need to wind up right there. Directors
just one last. Don't give them, as Boynet did yesterday, the excuse of ignorance, where he keeps saying, "I haven't seen this on TV," you haven't.
Well, we can't force him to say he has seen it.
Yeah, but it's not an excuse, and it's actually really, really worrying that our police don't seem to know what their subordinates are doing.
All right, thank you very much. Patrick Gadara, who's a communication consultant, Julie Masiga, a journalist, and Victor Bwire, Programs Manager, Media Council of Kenya. Thank you for joining us this morning on the newsroom. And of course, the countdown continues as we wait, first of all, for the Supreme Court to give their ruling at 10 o'clock, then the big announcement at 2 p.m. But right here on KTN News, we definitely are keeping tabs on that. For now, we take a short break and release KTN Home for Life and Style to begin. But on KTN News, let's catch up in just a few minutes where we have more stories making headlines and also look at our reporters who are all over the country, basically to see how prepared the different areas are for the elections should they take place in just a matter of hours. That's coming up right here on Kivumbi 2017.